to another episode of Money You Should Ask. I'm your host, Bob Wheeler, and in this episode, we're going to explore, question, examine, converse, dig deep, expose, laugh, and cry about the money beliefs, money blocks, and life challenges of our next guest. Turn up the volume, listen, learn, and laugh. Well, I am excited today. Our next guest, Art Bell, is a writer and former media executive known for creating, building, and managing successful cable television channels. His memoir, Constant Comedy, How I Started Comedy Central and Lost My Sense of Humor, tells the story of how, while a financial analyst at HBO, he pitched the idea of a 24-hour comedy network that he then helped develop and launch. Art went on to hold senior executive positions in both programming and marketing at Comedy Central. After leaving Comedy Central, he became president of Court TV, where he was a guiding force behind one of the most successful brand evolutions in cable television. In addition to writing, he plays piano and jazz drums. He currently resides in Greenwich, Connecticut, and Deer Valley, Utah, with his wife. Art, I'm super excited to have you here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
Well, you know, I'll just start off with, I was excited because Comedy Central, yes. Everybody knows Comedy Central, and it's certainly evolved over the years. But you're sitting there, you're an HBO analyst, financial analyst, which is probably the most exciting part of television, I'm guessing.
I found it to be, yes.
And then you came up with this idea. So while you were there, so you were sort of an entrepreneur, but you were working a day job, but you still had passion. Like how did this all happen?
Well, it starts when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved comedy. I was fascinated by comedy. I thought, man, how do these guys, watching comics on the Ed Sullivan Show, Alan King, Richard Pryor, those guys were on the Sullivan Show. And I watched them and I thought, what a great gift to be able to make people laugh. And I was about 8 years old when I figured that out. And I wanted to understand it. Yeah. For the rest of my life, I was fascinated with comedy. So, when I got to high school, a little bit of performance, but, mostly writing. I was, wrote some satire, got to college, did some performance, again, sketch comedy mostly, and some theater. But then when I was coming out of grad school, I said, wait a second, what I really want to do is I want to work at an all-comedy network. And then I looked around and there wasn't one.
Right.
And I said, whoa, there's an all news channel. There's an all music channel. There's an all everything else channel. What the heck is going on here? Yeah. So I thought about it and came up with an idea of how I would do it and everything, and ruminated for probably 3 years before I actually mentioned it to anybody. But when I got to HBO, I had worked at CBS for a year before I got to HBO. When I got to HBO, I figured, hey, man, I'm like down the hall practically from the people who do the programming, even though I was doing financial analysis. And I said, what the hell? I'm going to go pitch the head of programming. Her name was Bridget Potter. And I said, I'm going to go pitch Bridget on my idea. And I did. She gave me an appointment. I went to her office. I'm like, this kid who doesn't know much about television or programming. And I said, hey, Bridget, I got an idea. I think HBO should do an all-comedy network, 24/7 comedy. She goes, stop right there. Worst idea I've ever heard, and I'm going to tell you why. And she spent the next 10 minutes telling me why it was the worst idea she ever heard. No comedian would want to be on it. Nobody wants to watch that much comedy. Plenty of comedy on television already. I mean, she went through it, and very too expensive. Too expensive. That was another thing. And that was actually, like any conversation you have with somebody about your idea, it gave me some information about, okay, here's some objections that I'm going to have to sort of figure out.
So did you ever get a chance to go back to Bridget and say, hey, Bridget, here's my really bad idea?
It didn't happen exactly that way. I'll tell you how it did happen. Ultimately, Michael Fuchs heard about my idea, and I got a chance to pitch him. I hadn't prepared for it. Someone said, you got to pitch this to Michael, and took me in his office. And he liked the idea. So he said, look, get it together, figure out what you have to do, and then give us a presentation in a couple of months about, what it's going to cost and what it looks like and what the opportunities are. And I want you to give the presentation. I said, fine. So we set up the presentation, and there's about 30 executives in the room, including Bridget. And I give my presentation and there's like huge applause, and Michael's like, yeah, we're going to do this. I want this thing up and running in 6 months, which scared the hell out of me, as you can imagine. But before he did that, he said, I'm going to go around the room and I'm going to ask each of you what you think of the idea. And he starts with, Larry Carlson. I love it. Stu Smiley, head of promotion. I think it's terrific. Okay. And he got to Bridget. And she goes, oh, Michael, I just think it's the greatest idea. And then he went on. And I'm like, but, it's worth pausing there because it's interesting to think about why Michael did that, why he asked everybody in the room. He wanted to make sure he was making the decision to launch this thing with all support he needed from his top executives. He looked each of them in the eye, and I'll never forget that. And it's a good lesson for managers. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so now I'm going to ask this question because I haven't read your book yet, and everybody should read the book, especially if you love comedy. So Mitzi at the Comedy Store also had a comedy channel about the same time. And I believe Comedy Central was originally going to be the Comedy Channel. That's right. When we started at HBO, what other name could you possibly pick for an all-comedy network than the Comedy Channel? So we thought we were pretty slick. And in those days, you couldn't look up on the internet to see where all the other comedy channels were. And right. We just plowed ahead thinking, the hell, we're HBO. Who's going to bother us? We get a phone call. It's Mitzi Shore from the Comedy Store. And she says, listen, I got to tell you guys, I don't want you to use the name The Comedy Channel because I have a feed in my club of comedians. So when people are waiting for the show to start, I show that and I call it The Comedy Channel. We hung up the phone and it was panic, as you can imagine, because we were like deep into putting this channel together. We had materials, we had promotions, we had on air. We said, oh my God, if we have to change the name now, it's going to cost us $1 million. So the lawyer said, well, all we can do is, we can go to court. It'll cost us $1 million in court, or see if she wants to settle. So they went to Michael Fuchs and he said, all right, we're going to have to settle. And he picked a number and he was going to offer the number. It's in my book. See, that's why you have to read the book, because I'm not going to say the number. Don't say the number. And if you read my book, it's in there. And the lawyer said, okay, we are going to offer Mitzi that number. And just before they called, Mitzi called and she said, you know what? I'm not going to do anything about this. Life is too short, she said. Go ahead and use the name. And that was it. We never made the offer. We never paid for it. She was cool. We were cool. The lawyers took complete credit for solving the problem. That's so awesome. Well, one thing I do know with Mitzi, it was never about the money. It was always about comics, and it was always about comedy. She even helped. You know what? That's admirable, because if you're in this business to make money, sometimes you don't. You have to be in this. You have to be in this business to love it, which is why I got into it, because I loved it. Absolutely. I mean, she even actually helped set up the Laugh Factory with Jamie Masada. She gave him some old chairs and helped him because, she was all about comedy. So that's such a great story. And I've always wondered that little piece because I wasn't around when all that was happening. I was still a baby. So let me ask you this. Were your parents supportive of you going into television and comedy? Did they, you were a financial analyst. I believe you previously told me your dad was a CPA. So were they trying to get you to be like the smart and stable kind of job? Or what was your childhood like in terms of encouragement and things about money and success? Well, I grew up in the 60s. And in the 60s, the idea was to pick a profession that was going to put you slightly ahead of the pack. You can become a doctor. That's the best because doctors make money. You can become a lawyer. That's kind of second best. CPA if you're out of ideas. After that, there wasn't too much on the menu for my parents. My mother was a piano teacher, and she was, an artist. I mean, and the one thing she kept telling me is, for God's sake, don't go into the arts. Don't go into entertainment. Don't go into media. I mean, she didn't say it exactly that way, but she said you can't make money in it. If you're an artist, you go in because you love it, but you'll starve to death. Yeah. And so I went to college and I majored in economics and I became an economist, which wasn't on the list either. My father said, oh, I hate economists. They don't know what they're doing. Yeah. But anyway, I became an economist and I worked for 3 years in consulting in Washington, D.C. And I actually found myself making more money than I ever would have imagined. It wasn't a whole lot of money, but when you're a college kid and you grew up sort of middle class, it's like, hey, I got a car, I got an apartment, they pay me every week. This is great. And I really did love it. I really did love being an economist. I was smart. Those were my smart days. But then I decided I wanted to do something else. I wanted to go into television. So I went back to business school, came out, and I got a job with CBS. Now, most of my friends at business school were going to Wall Street.
Right.
And they were making lots of money. And my father's expectation was that I would go to Wall Street and make lots of money. But I said, no, I'm going to CBS. I want to work in the entertainment industry. And I told him what I was making at CBS, what the offer was. And he says, oh, wait a second. Isn't that pretty much like half as much as you were making as an economist in Washington 2 years ago before all this education? I said, yeah, Dad, it'll work out. It's all going to work out. But I was being paid nothing when I came out of business school. And my friends were like, are you crazy?
Yeah.
And I said, that's what I want to do. If it doesn't work out, I'll do something else. That's all.
How did you have the gumption to stick with it? Like, what was the inner voice that said, everybody else is telling me go for the money, and there's a part of me that's saying go for what makes me happy, maybe?
I'll tell you the turning point for me was when I was in business school, actually. I didn't go back to business school necessarily to get into television, some form of entertainment. I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I was at Wharton, and they had the Wharton Follies, which was a musical comedy review. Second year, I wrote the entire thing. And it was really, if I may say so myself, well written and very funny and got a lot of great feedback. Now, I realize it's only that kind of a thing. But I also realized how much I loved writing comedy and and the fact that I was good at it. I sort of had a feeling for it. And I thought, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm just going to do this. And I knew I wasn't a performer. I thought maybe I could be a writer. And then I said, well, you know what? I'm just going to go into the business and look around and see if I find something I like to do, which is what I did.
Well, that's awesome. And, as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, most people would say a financial analyst or a CPA, but like myself, can't be really all that funny because we're so, we've got to be so left brain. And it's like, so did you get that? Did people like, well, you can't have a sense of humor. You're an economist.
Bob, you hit about 6 myths in that one sentence, okay? First of all, 2 words for you. Bob Newhart. What was his profession?
Oh, my God. He was a CPA and he worked for the State Board of Equalization of California Sales Tax. Okay.
Franz Kafka, one of the funniest guys in the world.
Yeah.
He also was a bureaucrat. Actually, I'm kidding. He wasn't that funny, but he had a day job. A lot of people have day jobs.
Yeah.
And funny people are all over the place. I don't know if you noticed, but there's a lot of funny people. I'm reminded of a few stories where, for example, Lenny Bruce used to say he was the second funniest guy he knew, but he had a friend who said was hysterical, was really his idol. So, there's no shortage of funny people. I think the difference is, are there funny people who are willing to get on stage and have everyone look at them? Or get on camera, even worse, with extreme close-ups and everything. I mean, that's a leap.
Yeah.
Being funny is important to people personally, I have found.
Yeah.
Certainly my friends growing up all wanted to be funny. Certainly the guys. And the women who were funny, of course, they were girls in high school. I loved the funny girls. I always fell for the funny girls, and still do.
Yeah.
I'm married. My wife's very funny, but you know what I mean. I mean, comedy, humor is such an important, integral part of life, and certainly my life. It doesn't. It's not limited by what your occupation is. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not.
Yeah. And would you say early on you always wanted to be an entrepreneur, like even though you were working in the confines of a 9-to-5er?
No, I wouldn't say that. Entrepreneurship was kind of a different kettle of fish in the 60s. I mean, now kids grow up with, baseball cards with their favorite entrepreneurs on them, Tesla and, and the guys, all those guys in Silicon Valley. There was no role model that I can actually think of who was an entrepreneur. I mean, in my own hometown, there were a couple of, and I mean 2 wealthy guys. And they were both builders, they were real estate guys. They build tract housing.
Yeah.
I sure as heck didn't want to do that. No, I don't think I ever wanted to be an entrepreneur. I think I wanted to be smart and useful, in that order.
Yeah. And you talk about being an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur?
Yeah, intrapreneur that's a term that I never heard until after I was one. And I think the term came up in the mid-90s.
Okay.
After I had started Comedy Channel. But what an intrapreneur is someone who starts a business inside an existing company. So in my case, I started Comedy Channel inside of HBO. And so much of being an intrapreneur is similar to being an entrepreneur. I mean, you have to be a visionary, meaning you have to see what the thing is going to become in 10 years, not tomorrow, but in 10 years. You have to be passionate about it because there's enough people who are going to tell you it's a stupid idea, it'll never work, this is going badly. Ask me about the first year of Comedy Channel. All kinds of things that are going to make ordinary people who aren't visionary and passionate, I don't mean that as ordinary, I just meant people who aren't as invested in it as I was, say, okay, uncle, I'll stop, I'll do something else. The difference is when you're inside a company, you not only have to do all those things, you have to navigate the politics of the company. Yeah. The good news is you're not in the same resource-starved position that you sometimes are as an entrepreneur. You're not raising money every 3 months. You're not asking for, where can I hire a cheap accountant because you got a whole finance team behind you. You know what I mean? So that's the advantage. I will say this. I've worked at several companies in my life, and I've also been a consultant to several other companies, not necessarily in the entertainment business. And I've seen that companies have a really, very hard time starting new businesses inside for a variety of reasons. Number one, the idea of competing with themselves always comes up. New Coke and Coke. I don't know if you remember that whole fiasco. But, the big question was, oh my gosh, we're going to put out this new version of Coca-Cola. Are we going to compete with ourselves and end up worse off? That's one of the reasons.
And did you find that other people within the company were, yay, go Art, go, 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 or wow, how'd he get so lucky? Or were there high fives?
I don't think anybody thought of me as lucky. It was hard work, and I was in the spotlight, which was something I had not really bargained for. And I walked into the situation not knowing anything about the comedy business. Yeah. I know I loved comedy. The first time I met Stu Smiley, who was the head of comedy programming at HBO, they teamed us up. First thing he said to me, what do you know about comedy? And he didn't say it in a nice way, like I'm here to help. He said, what the hell do you think you're doing? And I had to learn the comedy business while I was doing it. So I would say it was a mix. There were certainly a lot of people I worked with at HBO who were very enthusiastic about it. Everybody wanted it to succeed because Michael Fuchs, who was the chairman, wanted it to succeed. You did what he said. Right. But truthfully, there were some skeptics, and I think Stu was skeptical for a while. Yeah. And the first year was very hard. And a lot of people, including me, thought they were going to shut it down any minute.
Well, I was just going to ask that. Were there any moments of oh my God, what have I done?
Yes. Several, actually. When I first pitched Michael, sort of inadvertently, ended up in his office and he said, what are you talking about at Comedy Network? Pitched him the whole thing. And he said, hey, I like the idea. Let's see if we can, take it to the next step. I said, what have I done at that point? Because I didn't really expect anyone to say yes. Right. But I kept the poker face and I went about my business. The next time I think was really when we launched, the launch of the Comedy Channel. And the day we launched, I was just so impressed by the fact that we had to come back and all the work we had done in the last 9 months to put all this programming together, we had to come back the next day and do it all over again. Because you're 24 hours of comedy, you're constantly shoveling programming into that maw, and we didn't have that much to start with. Yeah. So, that was the other one.
And what was your biggest... I don't want to say proud or pride, but when you look at the whole process, what part do you feel what, this felt really accomplished, or I feel really happy that this happened?
I can certainly say that today. I mean, I get up in the morning, I don't think about it every day, but, April marks the 30th anniversary of Comedy Central. So the idea that I can look in my rearview mirror and see something that I, helped put together, started, and then helped created, that it's still standing. And not only that, it's become kind of a cultural icon and has brought so many people happiness, laughter, and careers, all the people who've been employed over the years, and all the people who got to flex their creativity in ways that probably wouldn't have existed if there weren't a Comedy Central. Yes, I'm very proud of all of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm wondering if you've had any conversations with your dad since that talk about not going to Wall Street and taking half the money, and how your parents viewed it after the fact.
Well, of course, I've had plenty of conversations with my dad about my life and career. I mean, most memorably, he said, I don't know, a few years ago when we were talking about it, he said, well, you've had a great career. You've really done some wonderful things. So I think he came around to the whole idea, certainly. But along the way, again, my parents knew nothing about television, and they used to say to their friends and everybody else, we have no idea what art does. Seems to be making a living. What can I tell you? And for their friends, and this is really an exaggeration, but, again, their generation, if you weren't a doctor or a lawyer, they didn't quite know what you did. Right. So that was pretty much it. No, I think my parents were ultimately proud of my trajectory.
Did your parents, when you were a kid, talk a lot about money? Did you guys have money conversations? Did you talk about goals and benchmarks, or the meaning of money, or the power of money? Like, what was that like growing up in terms of money?
It wasn't really explicitly talked about, although the fact that my father was an accountant, he was a CPA and was dealing with people who were, at various points along the wealth scale. He had clients who were extremely wealthy. He had clients who were farmers, and extremely poor. And I did spend some time working for him when I was in high school. That was really kind of the biggest, the most complete view of money on a personal level that I saw, because he'd have clients come in and say, oh my gosh, I can't pay you because I don't have any money, or I need help. The business is flailing. As far as in the home, about what we talked about money, I wouldn't say we talked a lot about money. I always got the impression that my father spent a lot of money, whatever he had, and my mother saved a lot of money, whatever she could. And that was pretty much the dynamic. That's it. I don't know if I became, it's actually interesting. I have two brothers. I have one brother who's like me, who doesn't like to spend money and finds it horrifying in any, whether it's $10 or $10,000. It's like, I'd rather not, thank you. And I have another brother who spends money like my father did. Like, hey, let's buy another car. That'll be fun.
And do you and your wife talk a lot about money? Did you ask her about money when you first got together? Was that part of any conversations? Was there any conscious, intentional conversation around money?
No, we pretty much, we met, fell in love, and decided to get married. At the time, it was just before or just as I was putting Comedy Channel together at HBO. My career was certainly not, preordained to be successful at that moment.
Right.
I was on the cusp of either being very successful or having to find other work, essentially. And I think she knew that, and it wasn't a problem. Partly because she, at that time, was a consultant and making a nice living herself. So neither of us expected that we would starve, and neither of us projected that we would be well off, wealthy, or anything else. We just didn't know. But it wasn't a primary consideration at all.
What would you have done different? Like if there was anything, if you said, oh, I wish I could have gone back and just tweak this a little bit differently in terms of finances, I wished I had.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you something very personal. I wish I wasn't so afraid of money. I really have a hard time with it. I really have always been a little bit depressed by the whole concept. I didn't like to deal with it. Now, when I was working full time at corporations, I spent less time on it just because I was working. But since I've retired, and even before that, I will say, all along, I just didn't like to do it. I didn't like to balance the checkbook. I didn't like to think about what we had to spend. We were never, in tough shape. We never were scraping for food or rent or anything. Although I was fired from Comedy Central, which is in the book. I just gave you the last chapter, so now you don't have to read the book. Previously, you did have to read the book. Now you don't have to. But anyway, and that was the first time in my life, actually the only time in my life I was fired. And it was a shock. And it was, at that point, I had a wife, a mortgage, and a kid. And so it was pretty difficult from a financial point of view to stare down the barrel of that future because I didn't know if I'd get another job.
Right.
I did, obviously. That was the only time I was scared. But most of my adult life, I have been really uncomfortable with money. And the funny thing is, you asked about my parents and their feelings about it. I think it must have been something going on in my house. I probably should talk to a psychiatrist about this, but a couple of years ago, I was out to dinner with my brother and his wife, and I was there with my wife, and the check came. And I pulled out my credit card, didn't look at the check, and handed it to my wife. And my brother didn't look at the check. He pulled out his credit card and handed it to his wife. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I don't even look. I don't want to know. I don't know how much it cost. I just wanted to enjoy it. Melissa takes care of everything. I don't care." And that's the way I do it now. My wife, Carrie, takes care of everything.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I am sort of the same way. When I take my staff out, and when I take my staff out, if I'm paying attention, I'm like, wait, they had another drink. They had an app. So I have to just, I don't deal with paying for it. I mean, I pay for it, but
of course.
I don't want to know the details because I'll be like, wait, they didn't eat their whole plate. I'm going through everything.
I know. So you got the same disease I have.
I mean, do.
When it snows, I start panicking because the guy's going to come and plow. It's like, I hope it doesn't snow a whole lot because he's going to charge us more. And it's just, and of course, at this point, it's, for me, actually in the last 30 years, it's completely ridiculous to think that way. Yeah. To not buy a shirt because it costs $25 is, it got ridiculous. Or especially when it was something I needed. And my wife would say, "Oh, for God's sake, just buy the thing, will you?" And that's the way I live. That's the way I live.
That's awesome. Yeah, my benchmark is $25, shirts and pants.
Yeah, really.
Over that, I start to panic.
I haven't bought clothes in 2 years. It's been great.
Who needs them? Well, we're at our fast five, so I've got five fast questions. Just top of the mind. Here we go. What was the last podcast you listened to?
It was called Living Out Loud.
Okay. If you could choose to do anything for a day, what would it be?
I would say go scuba diving.
Cool. I'd be afraid of the sharks, so it would have to be in my pool. If you had to choose one chore, would it be cleaning, cooking, or yard work?
Cooking.
All right. What's the most expensive thing you ever bought for yourself personally, not including a car or a house?
Piano. I bought a nice piano.
That's a good investment. I play the piano. Love it. What's the most daring thing you've ever done?
Starting the Comedy Channel, I would have to say, is the most daring thing that I've ever done.
Yeah, that's and it paid off.
Yes, it did.
Paid off
for everybody.
So if we're we have our M&M moment, our money and motivation sweet spot, what would be a practical piece of advice you would give, or a wealth wisdom, something that you've learned along the way? Something like handing your wife the bill and letting her deal with the emotions of running up the charge. But is there something out there that, like, you wish maybe somebody had said to you when you were younger?
Yeah, and it's going to be, it's a really simple thing. And it's about saving. And the idea that if you start saving when you're 20 instead of when you're 40, you're going to end up with so much more money at the end that you can rely on. And I know that's hard. It's hard for most people to save, partly because it's easy to spend, partly because you don't have a lot of disposable income all the time. But even when you don't have much, put $1 aside a week, put anything, and put it in a place where it has a chance to earn some money, not the bank, but find your way to the stock market as quickly as you can, because the chances are that's going to grow beautifully over the 50 or 60 years you watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. And leave it in there.
Don't touch it when the stock market crashes. Don't even look.
Don't even look. You got to keep going. Well, I so appreciate you coming on. I so appreciate hearing the story. And again, I recommend everybody go out and read the book. I'm going to go read the book. I have a personal investment in knowing the rest of the story. But, one of the things that I'm really appreciate what you talked about is what I really heard was, even though there have been things you've been afraid of, or even if dealing with money sometimes isn't the most fun, even when you're being an analyst, you're still following your passion. You're still looking for what makes me happy, probably what makes me laugh, and still going for it. Because I think a lot of people out there think that you don't have to be afraid, or you have to have all the answers to go forward. And the truth is, we're all just sort of winging it when we're going out there. I mean, we have an idea, but we're going blind. We're going out there blind, I think.
Listen, I think everybody has those moments throughout their career. It's the idea that you're faking it.
Yeah.
That whatever you're doing, you're getting away with it, or you're not smart enough, or you're not as smart as the other guy, or all of those things. They occur to everybody, no matter who you are, no matter what you've started, because that's the way humans are built. So if you're going to let that stop you, that's not going to be helpful.
Not going to help. Keep moving forward. Keep moving forward. Where can people find you online and social media?
Well, we can start with my website, artbellwriter.com. Okay. I'm on Facebook as Art Bell Author. I have a Facebook page, Art Bell Author. And they can buy my book at Amazon. And the book, again, is called Constant Comedy, How I Started Comedy Central and Lost My Sense of Humor. It's a memoir. It's personal. It's funny, and I think it's a great read, and I certainly recommend it. So go out and buy it, and you can find out more about, as I said, more about me on Amazon. My biography's all over the place. So,
well, that's awesome, and we'll be sure to put up links and all that so we can get it to people easy. I so appreciate it. I want to say to our listeners, please don't forget to share the love. Follow us Give us a like on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Search for Money You Should Ask, all one word. Subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast player. Visit Apple Podcasts and search for Money You Should Ask, or click on the link below. If you prefer to watch our episodes, head over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel. For more tips, tools, or to learn how to have a healthier relationship with money, visit themoneynerve.com. That's nerve, not nerd. moneynerve.com. Art, it's been such a pleasure. I so appreciate getting to connect. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you.